Welcome to chapter 3 of the Ruth study. We're going to get to the juiciest chapter that there is, and a little bit of some interesting things that are going on in Ruth's life and Boaz's life and Naomi's. And I think there's some I truly think there's some interesting conversation that we can take with this. So we're going to do another review of last week, because obviously we want to make sure that everybody is up to speed, and we're going to be doing this with our favorite cartoons.
Any joy in Naomi's homecoming was cut short by the realization that they were now two destitute widows with no way to support themselves. Ruth, realizing the gravity of their situation, asked if she could glean the fields, which in those days was how many of the poor survived, by following behind harvesting farmers and gathering leftover grain. These particular fields were owned by a man named Boaz. Boaz was a religious man, a rich man, a generous man, a smart man. Well, at least that's how he thought of himself.
The Lord be with you.
No matter what Ruth thought of him personally, he did offer her protection and safety. He took pity on this hard-working foreign girl. Ruth found his displays quite endearing, if not a bit amusing. Ruth told Naomi about her day. Naomi realized the man Ruth had worked for was Boaz, her kinsman. If perchance Ruth were to somehow marry Boaz, they would both be well cared for. So Naomi developed a scheme where...
Scheme. That's where we're at today. So we're going to be looking at chapter 3 in 3 different sections. This first section, lessons from, as I looked at some of the Jewish, some of this redemption plan, it's pretty straightforward from what we're going to be looking at. There wasn't a whole lot of intrigue or mischief but there's something I do want to read to you, because it's important for you to understand the Levirate marriage system, because this is the system that is used to get Ruth through this. That's part of the scheme. So in Deuteronomy 25, it says, if brothers abide together and one of them dies and has no children, then the wife of the dead brother should not marry a stranger. Her husband's brother should take her to him as a wife, perform the duties, and it shall be their firstborn child will have the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be wiped out from Israel. So the idea of this is that if, in order to keep property and family name going, that if you're married and your husband dies, you don't have any children, then your brother-in-law goes about the work of helping you become in the family way, so that you may have, and hopefully, a firstborn son who will then carry on the name of your dead husband, and thus he will then inherit all of the land that the original husband would have had, so that the land does not go off somewhere else or somewhere to another person. Of course, the intrigue of Ruth and Naomi and Oprah was the fact that all the males of the family died. Thus, there was no exact brother. Now, this Levirate marriage rule applies not to just brothers, but to next of kin on down the line, in the same way that you can get married, you can have a child, and then that first child inherits all the stuff that the original father should have passed on. Which in this case means that if there's any land that Amalek had, that he still maintained possession or control of from before his death, that should have gone to his 2 boys, now resides with Naomi and Ruth to a certain extent, providing they get married to a relative and have a child. If they don't, the land reverts back to whoever the next up the kin line, and the way it goes. So, as well as their welfare and their protection. So it's important, and that's part of the scheme that we're going to look at, is that Naomi wants to make sure that Ruth gets in line with a kinsman that is the Redeemer. And we'll hear that word a lot in that. And this is, even though this is a bit of an unusual telling of, one of the things that, as I read through the Bible passages here, was the fact that this, even though this is an intriguing story, even though this is an interesting way of this happened, this is not to be taken as a way for modern day young ladies to find a husband. And they put in there that, and of course most of us think, well, duh. But there are people who say, if the Bible says so, then it must be an okay way to go about doing this. But modern day rules of society and so forth have prevailed, so that going forward with that type of scheme that we're going to talk about, and there is two ways of reading this, which is what we're going to look at here next. That this first chapter, this first section, 1 through 3, the plan, there's two very important Jewish words, and I cannot pronounce them right, but this is roughly how they're spelled without all the phonetical symbols and so forth. But the one is Gala, and that stands for uncovering. And it can mean all kinds of stuff. It has sexual innuendo, and it has redemptive innuendo, depending on content, depending on the rest of the verbs and nouns and the words around it. It'll depend on all kinds of stuff, how you take it. The other word, which, according to the books, sounds almost exactly the same, Gahal, the way the A's are pronounced differently, means lying down. But it can also mean restore. So, it's one of those that this chapter, more than any of the other chapters, can be read two very distinctive ways, and then thus a whole combination of weaving it back and forth to come up with something else. A lot of it, according to the scholars and the authors, depends on your own morality, your own point of view, your own history, your own, what it is that you're trying to get out of this. The reader must first, I'm going to read this to you, must first decide whether Ruth appears to be a willing marionette, willing puppet, in the hands of a crafty, strong-willed mother-in-law. That's one way of reading this. She's just being acted out. Or whether she demonstrates initiative, pluck, chutzpah. So is Ruth a puppet? Or is she much more of an instigator in this, and that she manipulates Boaz into giving her what she wants and where this goes? And those are the two ways of reading this. She's either doing an obedient daughter-in-law, or a scheming with her mother-in-law to help create the outcome that they hope for. And of course, it's not a guaranteed outcome. Because the other way of reading this, of course, is that does Ruth merely encourage a shy, hesitant Boaz to follow what he should do? Because he is the redeeming relative. He is smitten with her to a certain extent. Does she help him? She support him, encourage him to get to go? Or is she entrapping him? And those are two extremes. And scholars throughout history have read it both ways. So, as you read through here, I want you to keep two sentences or two structures in mind as we read through this. The word threshing floor, and the word lie down. And of course, there's the unique phrase, uncover his feet. And we'll discuss some of that as we get after we look at this verse. So who would like to read verse 1? You can either do it on the screen or off your own.
One day Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for?"
That was 1. 2 is up there. So,
Oh.
No, you did good.
Oh.
For whatever reason, my finger hit it twice by accident. So, 2.
Now, isn't Boaz, whose young women you were with, our relative? Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor.
No more shall you anoint yourself and put on your best clothes and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and drinking.
My computer is as tired as I am today.
When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do.
I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered.
So when she went down to the threshing floor, and she did everything just as her mother-in-law had ordered.
And after, oh,
I was just gonna finish the thing.
and after Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was cheerful, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay down.
All right. So, how many times, first of all, what is a threshing floor? Those you farmer agricultural Iowans, what in your mind, what is a threshing floor? We'll get to the other connotations of threshing floor.
After the harvest is done.
After the harvest is done, it's usually a big flat space that has a good breeze because you can throw the grain in the air, the shaft blows away, and the grain comes back down. We don't see too many of those anymore. I guess the closest to that would be a grain elevator. And a threshing machine, and I mean there's a combination of multiple things that do what they did by hand at that time. Does any of your notes say anything else about what the threshing floor sometimes refers to? It's quick.
Well, one of them is that the grain had to be threshed and then guarded, both activities being accompanied by festivity. So it's a joyous time of the year.
Joyous time of the year, and you have a very polite Bible for joyous festivities.
Yes.
Now mine says the threshing floor was a public area where animals trampled the barley heads to separate the grain from the chaff. Boaz slept there to protect his grain from thieves.
Yep, and that's why they slept there. They didn't want anybody stealing it because it is a it's a big open area. Like I said, there's a tradition that the Temple Mount, where Solomon would eventually build the great temple, the place where where Abraham offered up Isaac, that whole area in Jerusalem was the big main threshing area because it's huge and flat, solid rock. And I could see where that would be the regional area where everybody would come and you had your own pile and so forth. It also had another connotation from that is kind of referred to back in Genesis and referred to a little bit in a few other areas. There was also a well-known red light district. When all the men were down there threshing away and guarding their stuff and they had to spend the night celebrating and enjoying the time, it was a time when women of prostitution would trade their wares for grain, for stuff that had happened to be there. So it was well known in the writing times of Ruth and for centuries after that when you refer to the threshing floor, you could get a giggle out of people, or you could get a because are they talking about just harvesting, or are they talking about the other activities that go on there? Which is why there's more as we dissect these first 7 verses. That lying down has also a sexual connotation to it, depending on how it's put. So lying down on the threshing floor can mean you're preparing yourself to do something naughty and not necessarily proper. Or it can mean you're laying down to protect your grain and doing the proper thing you're supposed to do. All depending on your perspective, your family history, where you're coming from, and so forth. But then we throw in there, she uncovered his feet. So does anybody have a note in their Bible about uncovering feet?
Yeah. It's the idea was she wanted to wake him up, and it would have been cool at night, and his cold feet eventually would have woken him up, and lo and behold, there's more than barley beside him.
Yep. And the way that the translation of uncovering the feet is the easiest and anatomically way of describing it. It really means uncovering the lower half of the body. I mean, depending on the way it's written in the Hebrew, it could mean uncovering the lower half of the body, and often is thought of as uncovering in order to lie down in a place like the threshing floor. So I'm saying, depending on how you read all those little hints, all those little double entendres, all those little hints, it can be a far more planned, deceiving. I mean, that's the entrapment reading viewing of it, versus she comes down there and just wakes him up, and she's laying there. But what else does she do? What does she do right before she gets there? This part I thought was extremely interesting, because there's more connotation. What does Naomi have her do before she goes back down to the threshing field? She bathes, she anoints herself with perfume, and she puts on some nice clothes. This is the Hebrew tradition of ending of mourning. She's no longer mourning her dead husband. She has now stopped that, and she is ready to move on with her life. And there's no entendre there at all. That's exactly what, if you're in mourning, you've been drab clothes, you haven't necessarily, you haven't done your hair up, you haven't smelled nice, you've just been in mourning. We all know what that feels like at times. We've all been there. And so Naomi says, it's time. It's time for you to move on with your life. So, go take a bath, go put some perfume on, put on your best clothes, and head down there. It's also the exact same phraseology and preparedness for somebody who's about to get married. In the Jewish tradition, so it's a post-death mourning ritual to signify a new start, or it's the signifying of the new starts and celebration in order to get married. Both of which are an interesting combination for Ruth and Naomi. Ruth, who is now going to go to the threshing floor, whatever terminology you want to use for that, nice or more nefarious. She's going to go down there and lie down next to him, nice or nefarious. She's going to uncover his feet, either to wake him up to say hi, or to make him think something else happened. And she's all dressed up and smells good, looks good, signifying to all the, specifically Boaz, that she's over her dead husband, and she's ready for whatever would happen next. So, yeah, go ahead, Margaret.
My footnote here says it was common for a servant to lie at the feet of his master and even share a part of his conversation. By observing this custom, Ruth would inform Boaz that he could be her kinsman redeemer, that he could find someone to marry her or marry her himself.
Yep.
It was family business, nothing romantic.
And that is the other way of reading it.
Yeah.
That this is all business, you are my family redeemer. I am, and she answers differently. Remember how she answered him last chapter? She introduced herself over and over again as a certain type of person. It's a little more derogatory. She called herself a foreigner. And now all of a sudden she introduces herself as her, or will introduce herself as her servant, somebody obliged to him. And she's going to call him her redeemer kinsman, her kinsman redeemer, the person that can bring back the Levirate marriage, allow her to be back into the good customs of her husband, or back in the family, and restore the family name, and be a restorative person. Part of the question is, as we go into this next section, is Boaz thick, as in he doesn't really get that he's supposed to redeem Ruth? It's like, there's a pretty girl flirting with him, but he's an older guy, and this is really nice, and doesn't really see himself as this redeemer until she says, wake up, you know, I am this person in your family, and this is the nice version. I am, you know, I'm here to be part of your family. It's all business. It's, you know, redeeming my dead husband. Or does she trick him? That's the entrapment part by this next segment. So this next thing that we're gonna look at is called Midnight. Well, I'll let that takes.
Midnight at the oasis, send your candle to bed. Shadows painting our faces, traces of romance in our heads.
So, with that in mind, you know, midnight at the threshing floor. It's not the oasis, but it's at the threshing floor. She's going to go down there, and she's going to meet up with Boaz. So before we get into this part of it, as the harvest season draws near to the end, without any further action on Boaz's part, you know, one of the things that Naomi and Ruth realized, life's going to get tough. Once they're done gleaning the fields, once they get done with whatever work they get here, things are going to be a little bit more hand to mouth from this point on. So that's part of what this scheme is, this thing that we're moving forward with. And so as we get to this next chapter, let's see if this will work this time. So we're going to do 8 through 13. So I don't know where we left off, so.
In the middle of the night, something startled the man. And he turned and he discovered a woman lying at his feet.
Who are you? He asked. I am your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are the kinsman's redeemer.
Then he said, Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after a young man, whether rich or poor.
And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character.
Now, although it's certainly true that I'm a redeemer, there's a redeemer who is a closer relative than I am.
Stay the night, and in the morning, if he'll redeem you, good, let him redeem. But if he doesn't want to redeem you, then, as the Lord lives, I myself will redeem you. Lie down until the morning.
Okay, so we now get to this section where they've had this conversation in the middle of the night, and the version that I used up here, I got a kick out of that fit yours very much. It says he shuddered and woke up, which means all of a sudden he's cold and he wakes up and there's Ruth, and he says, what's he say?
Who are you?
Who are you? It's dark. It's not like, I mean, one of the things that the threshing floor, this big open area where they've done all this threshing, all this dried grain, there are not going to be a lot of torches and lanterns around to keep it well lit, because you all know what happens to grain when it's drying out and there gets to be a little flame in it. The field can go poof and it'll be gone. The grain could just be burnt up, turned to toast, and nothing there. So it's dark. It's you know, middle of the night, and all of a sudden he wakes up with a shudder, and he's cold, and looks over, and here's this good-smelling, well-dressed person, and he can't tell who it is. Can't see her face, and he says, "So who are you?" And she replies with what I told you before. She goes, "Church, I'm Ruth, your maidservant, or your servant maid, or your you know, this person who is indebted to you because you are our kinsman redeemer." Now, the big hint here is, what did Naomi tell her to do? remember in the first section? She's supposed to go down there, lay down next to him, uncover his feet, and then do what?
Wait for him to tell her what to do.
Right. And what does Boaz say?
Well, he says, here, crawl under the covers.
No, she says that.
Yeah.
He says,
Well, he
what would
asked
you
her
like me to
that.
do?
Yeah,
He-
she asks him,
Yeah,
cover us
can
up?
you throw your in some versions, it's throw your wing over me. Now, there's a lot of people that have looked at some of the commentary that's wing, and they want to put a whole much more double entendre into what wing means. It's the same as taking his cloak and covering her up to help keep her warm. There is nothing overly dastardly in this event, other than the fact that it could be, what is going to happen next. They're now going to be cuddling on the grain floor for the rest of the night. And so there's something else that goes with it. But Naomi told her to do whatever he said. He gets there and wakes up and he basically says, tell me what you want. So he basically says to her, what do you want? And this opens up the opportunity for Naomi to read a lot into this. But it could also be the beginning of her dowry, paying for his right to marry her. That he's a down payment on her wedding dowry, for lack of a better purpose, to let Naomi know he's serious. He means business. He's giving her part of the contract, the wedding contract, up front, that he's going to take care of this.
Maybe he's a nice guy. He
And
gave her
yeah,
extra
there is
money.
you're hungry, here's some food, go on home. That's why every place I read, through all these great big humongous books and so forth, nobody wants to take a stand on what exactly it means.
Well, Charles Ryrie is the commentator of the Bible, and he's basically he is saying Boaz knows that Naomi and Ruth have double teamed in this effort, and so he gives the gift, sends basically a gift to Naomi for goodwill and assurance.
Yeah.
So it's it's kind of I hear you loud and clear, don't worry, I'll take it from here.
I got it. I got you covered. Yeah, it's that sealing of the contract. He realizes that Naomi, this isn't just Ruth on her own, because he now mentions Naomi. Go back and tell her. It also is another one of them that was briefly mentioned. It could be he didn't want Naomi scheming anymore. I got it. Don't you go find this other kinsman. I got a plan, which we're going to read about next week. There's a way that this is going to work out that I want it to work out for me, and if it doesn't, then it'll still be good for you, but don't mess this up. Don't go getting in the way. Just sit quietly. And,
I like her reference. Okay, you came here. I am going to take care of you. I can't tell you right now I'm going to take care of you, but here, take the grain. I'm going to take care of you.
And we get a hint of that, especially in verse 18, when Naomi says, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. She's bound and determined that this is a good sign. She's just got a thumbs up that something's going to happen, especially if Naomi gave her all those details about the fact that he's agreed to be our Redeemer kin. He's going to, but there's somebody else out there. He's going to take care of it, and so forth. And the fact he told her not to be seen. He's worried about her well-being. He's worried about where she's going and what she's being.
Or is he being selfish and not wanting his name linked to her as one of those women?
If it goes bad, yeah. Is there an escape plan B here for him? That if this goes bad, I wasn't there. Didn't happen to me, so that he can move on. Part of what for us to finish up the discussion on is let's see. That's all. 2 minutes. So we talked about what really happened here, and now it's supposed to be how are we supposed to know? in your biblical reading, in your own theological explanation, in your heart of heart, your soul of souls, how do we reconcile all the silences in this book? The silence, the things that are, all the details that we want to read in, that, whether it's a conspiracy to entrap Boaz, or whether it's Naomi being a sweet girl trying to get Boaz to wake up and see the roses and make her, redeem them, or is it Naomi, worried about her husband's land, and oh my goodness, we got to make sure we live here, we don't lose the farm, or what? I can't remember, what was your phrase? One night stand, we lose the land. Yeah. How are we supposed to, how do we, and I'm doing this like a corporate thing, I don't mean, because I'm not saying that all 13 of us should come up with one conclusion and that's it, but how do we, how do you, how do I, what do we take from this? How do we decipher this kind of stuff? I'm sure I'm not gonna pick on you, Courtney, but I'm sure Courtney has a different idea and definition of what this story looks like versus Rita. I'll pick the two. I haven't picked on Rita yet, so we got.
There was desperation there too.
Oh yeah. Oh, Naomi has gone through a lot. Her husband's died. Her boys have died. She had to travel to a foreign land. She had to travel back. She had to deal with the stares and gossip of everything that's going on. She's poor. She's having her daughter-in-law's out there gleaning fields so that they have enough to eat. We've all had probably times in our lives when we've had desperate thoughts if we didn't have desperate actions.
I kind of like my footnote here for 18, and it says, in times of waiting, often the best thing a person can do is to sit still and draw strength from God. As Boaz waited to discern God's will, Naomi and Ruth waited to discover it.
And that's exactly what Naomi said. And there's a lot to that. The verse, be still and know that I am God. I mean, there is nothing tougher in the world in the midst of everything falling apart around you to sit still and to wait to see if it's going to work out, to see if God's going to answer, to see what window's going to open because the door went shut. It is hard. And we can take a lot of refuge, we can take a lot of comfort from the fact that in this chapter, and one of the things that Bill had talked about was the fact that the kindness, the one book I have on here is how can we live lives of risky kindness? Because this was risky kindness on everybody involved in this story. There was possibility of loss of income, loss of prestige, loss of where they stood in the community. Everything under the sun, there was a risk, and yet all of them had, I believe, in their heart and in their soul, there was an issue of kindness here. Boaz wanted to be kind to Naomi. Boaz wanted to be kind to Ruth. Ruth wanted to be kind to Naomi. Naomi wanted to be kind back to Ruth. I mean, it was an ongoing community circle, and of course, like a lot of this is metaphor for us. It was for Israel. It was for the times that we live in. How can we how should we act? And part of it, should we be shocked? You suppose things like this go on today? I mean, in all the ways that we talked about it today, from scheming and entrapment to naive and kindness. Is this still happening now, 600 years, 6,000 years later, or whatever, not 6,000, 4,000 years later? This is one of those where my professor, Dr. Lamore down at Iowa Wesleyan would say, this is a window into the past, where we can look back and see the history, but at the same time, the window pane that's on the window is reflecting back at us. That there's an awful lot that's going on there that's the same as is going on here. And when somebody seems to be, here's something to think about to take from this. If somebody seems to be entrapping you, trying to work a scheme around you, is there a way that you can turn that to be kind? Is there a way that you can be God's instrument of redemption for that person that is seeking that? So part of me says we shouldn't be shocked. I think, what's my last question So is redemption given as a reward for the behavior in this chapter, or in spite of it? I know, those are kind of tricky words.
Whose behavior?
Well, everybody, you know, everybody behaved a little bit uniquely odd, uniquely, depending on which way you want to read it. They all can have a little bit of a nefarious act. They can all have acts of kindness, but there is an ongoing redemption going on here, and so is it a reward, or is it? Is this redemption going to happen? Would this redemption happen even in spite of all that was going on? It kind of goes back to our question last week when we were talking about is God's plan for Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. Is God laid this plan out there, and it may have been a much shorter plan. Boaz may have supposed to have woke up way before this and redeemed them, but it took till this to get there, and it took Ruth and Naomi to get to that part. Should Ruth and Naomi been more upfront and gone right straight to Boaz on the very first day and said, "You are my redeemer kin. You got to do something. You got to either marry Naomi or you got to marry Ruth." And now, and how would that have played out? I mean, that's an interesting thought, because the man, if we take the Jewish midrash, he had just lost his wife not too much before that, and so all of a sudden there's another people show up out of foreign countries saying, "Come on, you got to marry one of us. We got to fix this here." It's an interesting, intriguing wrap around this question of how does God redeem us? How does God redeem things that have gone wrong? Is it up to us to come up with plans for redemption, or does God already have that redemption worked out? We just need to sit still and wait for it to happen, or for God to work in our lives so that we can realize where that window that just opened up is, and so forth. And I believe, as we've got to this part, and as we're going to look forward, that's what God's trying to tell us through the book of Ruth. Is part of that is you need to wait, and you need to act, and you need to act by what God's telling you to do, and you need to wait because that's what God's instructing you to do, and you need to figure out how to be in connection with God so that you can figure out which one of those two to do, which is no answer. When people come to me and they're said with a problem, and they're like they want an answer, and there really is no answer. I can tell them, and the answer is like, well, pray about it, meditate on it, try to discern what God wants to say. Usually, is not the answer that they want. They want me to tell them to dump the boyfriend, leave the wife, leave the job. They want black and white answers in a gray world. And Ruth shows us that there really, gray worlds have existed for 4,000 years now, and will continue to exist until Jesus comes back. And then it no longer, it won't become a black and white world. It'll become a big rainbow, colorful world where everybody is happy and there are no tears. So with that thought, is there any questions, any other comments, any other things as we prepare for this last week? I do want to let you know, Bill and Joy, of course they couldn't be here tonight, they're off visiting Gideon, but they have purchased the 1950s theatric widescreen CinemaScope Technicolor version of the Book of Ruth, back when they did Ben-Hur and all those other big, and so after we get back from the Holy Land, we're going to have a movie night to watch the theatrical version of the Book of Ruth, and so we can all sit there and go like, that's not in the book, that's not in the book, oh wait, they got that really wrong. Or we can sit there going like, oh my goodness, I never thought of it that way before. Bill looked at the trailer and said it's a quite an interesting looking film, because it's that whole, that same whatever big TV movie voice guy doing the voiceover of, excitement and intrigue on the threshing floor. I don't know what it looked like, but we're going to do that. We'll do that in November as our capstone to the study. So, with that in mind, let us close in prayer. Lord, I want to thank you for allowing us to gather here tonight with the roll of the thunder outside and the sound of the coming rain, we just ask that you give us safe travel, that you allow us to return home, to enjoy our time with our family. Lord, we just ask that you pour out your love and care for those who could not be here tonight, that you would build and joy as they travel back from Minneapolis, that you continue to watch over each of us as we go about our daily lives this next week, that we may continue to love you and learn from the lessons that we read about, that we talk about, and that we discuss at times like this. We ask all this in your precious name. Amen.